God is good, isn't he? We could continue this worship for another several minutes as far as I'm concerned. It's good to see each one out tonight. I know we're missing several tonight. Let's just mention them in our prayers, that God is with them wherever they may be and taking care of whatever their needs may be. But we're here tonight. We thank God for the Sabbath that he's given us, the day that he set apart, called us to convocate, and I just look forward to the Sabbath every week. It's a much needed part of my life now. Just a couple of announcements. Next Monday night, is that the 6th and the 7th? 6th? I believe it's the 6th, is our Feast of Trumpets celebration. And if you would like to bring your own dinner around 6 to 6:30 and just eat together there, and we'll have a worship time beginning at 7. And I think Gary is scheduled to speak that night. So that is our Feast of Trumpets gathering. Other fall feast days are coming up, I believe. Well, I don't have it in front of me, so I hate to guess the dates, but we'll get the information out to you as soon as possible. Let's get into the Word tonight for a few minutes. I want to take a look at the life of the Apostle Peter. And so I've titled this teaching, The Life of Peter the Apostle and the Glory of God. Last time we talked about, not last week, but the last time I was in this pulpit, we talked about Lazarus, the death of Lazarus, and the glory of God. So tonight, we're going to look into the life of Peter the Apostle. And the purpose for highlighting the life of Peter, the story of Lazarus, was to show us that, for example, Lazarus, the raising of Lazarus from the dead, was a picture of our being raised from spiritual death. How God moved into that situation and circumstance for his glory. And so tonight, we want to look into the life of Peter and see how God works in Peter's life. And hopefully we can see that it's very similar to how God works in our life. What I want us to see in these stories that we go through in the scriptures is how the absolute sovereignty of God works in the lives of his creation. What I want us to see in these stories is the proof that our lives are meant to be lived in such a way that God is glorified. And what I know is, what I want us to understand is, it is God who by his grace works things out in our life according to his will. And I want us to see that. I want us to see that it is God working in us, in those whom he foreknew, as Paul said in Romans, that we've talked about recently. He's working in us to bring about his perfect will for our lives, which are meant to be lived for his glory. Amen? According to Ephesians chapter 1, Paul says that we might be for the praise of his glory. And so I believe, my perspective from the scriptures is, all that God does in this earth, all of his plans and all of his purposes are to one end. And that end is for the glory, or for his glory to be seen in all the earth. We talked about that a couple weeks ago, how that God has promised that this earth will be filled with his glory. And we're a part of that plan. And how God works things in our life is going to help accomplish that plan of his. So he is going to be recognized by all of creation that he is God alone. One day, according to the scriptures, Paul writes in Romans 14, verse 11, and God says, as I live, says the Lord, every knee shall bow to me, and every tongue shall confess to God. How many of you know that that's going to happen? One day, every knee will bow, and every tongue confess that he is God. So let's just take a quick look into the life of Peter and see how God uses a chosen vessel like Peter as a vessel of honor, someone whom God knew before the foundation of the world, someone that God has called or what had called to bring honor and glory to God. So let's go to the beginning of the story, and that's going to be in Matthew chapter 4, and we're going to read verses 18 through 20. Matthew 4, 18 through 20. While walking by the Sea of Galilee, he, Jesus, saw two brothers, Simon, who is also called Peter, and Andrew, his brother, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. And he said to them, "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." Now listen to what verse 20 says. Immediately, they left their stuff, they left their nets, and followed him. The Bible says immediately. They dropped what they were doing, they left their nets, probably their boats, and they followed him. There are a couple things I want to highlight from this passage. First, I think that we are seeing the fulfillment of a prophetic word given through the prophet Jeremiah regarding the restoration of the people of God, namely Israel. In Jeremiah chapter 16, verse 16, God speaks to the prophet and says, "Behold, I am sending for many fishers, declares the Lord, and they shall catch them. And afterward I will send for many hunters, and they shall hunt them from every mountain and every hill, out of every cleft, out of the cleft of the rocks." God was speaking through Jeremiah, and I'm just summarizing what he was saying here in Jeremiah chapter 16. He says, I'm going to find my people and bring them back. I'm going to restore them. And in this particular case, God says, I'm going to send for many fishers. Well, the first two guys that Jesus the Messiah calls happen to be what? Fishermen. I believe that's the fulfillment of that prophecy. Peter and his brother Andrew, they were the very first people that the Messiah calls to follow him. And Jesus said to them, "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." The second thing that is notable in this passage is the response of Simon Peter and Andrew, his brother. Jesus said to them, "Follow me." And the Bible says that they immediately left their nets and followed him. Why do I highlight this? I highlight this because I believe what is happening here, what we see here, is a picture of what I call, and others have called it too, I didn't coin the phrase, but it's an effectual call of God. It's an irresistible call of God. Just as Lazarus who was dead was raised from the grave, when Lazarus heard Jesus' words saying, "Come forth," Lazarus only had one response: to obey the call. That was his only choice. So the call of Lazarus from the grave was an effectual call. It was an irresistible call. And here we see Peter and Andrew being told by Jesus, "Come follow me." And we don't have any details, so I'm not making the assumption that they had a private discussion. They picked up their cell phones, called their wives, "Hey, should we do this? Who's going to take care of the boat? Who's going to take care of the nets? What do you think? Who is this guy? Does anybody know? Should we run a background check on?" No. The Bible says they immediately dropped what they were doing, they left their nets, and they followed. Something quickened in them. Something in them came alive, and they knew that there was something different about this man who said, "Follow me." And so they dropped what they were doing and followed. And I believe that's a picture of God calling us from spiritual death. When God calls your name, you follow. You come forth. You say, "Here am I." That's the effectual call of God. Even though Peter and Andrew were alive in the flesh, they, like the rest of mankind, were dead in their sin and their trespasses. We all were there at one time, according to Paul the Apostle, right? We were all dead. All had sinned. But Jesus commands them to follow, and something in them, as I said, was quickened, and they responded to the call to follow. For you and me and anyone who has come to a genuine faith, we responded in the same way. As Paul said, we were dead in our trespasses and sin, but God, being rich in mercy because of the great love with which he loved us, even when we were dead in our trespasses, made us alive together with Christ. By grace you have been saved. God's calling of you and me to a spiritual life was an irresistible call. It was an effectual call from death to life. Simon Peter began following the Messiah and was a witness to the calling of the rest of the disciples. He was also a witness to the miracle-working power of the Messiah in seeing many people healed of their afflictions and their sicknesses. And one of those people that he witnessed divine healing was his mother-in-law. That's recorded in the Scripture. Our next passage that I want us to look at is a well-known story of Peter walking on the water. How many of you have ever heard that story? It's been preached by everybody, so I'm not here to bring you any new revelation on that particular topic, but I want to, on that particular story, but I want to read it. Jesus had instructed his disciples to get into a boat and go to the other side of the sea. A storm had come up, and Jesus came to them in the boat, walking on the water, and they were just a little bit afraid, the Bible says. They were fearful. Wind, waves beating against the boat, and someone comes walking to the boat on the water. They thought it was a ghost, perhaps. Matthew 14, verses 27 through 30. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Take heart, it is I, do not be afraid." And Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." Now, if it wasn't Jesus, whatever it was, don't you think would have pretended to be? I mean, I thought it just interesting. Peter says, "Well, Lord, if it's really you, then command me to come out on the water." Well, anyone could have done that, I guess, but that's not anything important. But he said, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." And he said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came to Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Now, again, I don't have a major point to make regarding this passage that you haven't heard already. I highlighted because I want you to see the character of Simon Peter. Simon Peter, as we read through his life, and we're not going to read every circumstance that is recorded in the Scripture, but we'll see that he was bold, that he was not afraid to speak up. He wasn't afraid to step forward. That's just his character. He was willing to take a risk. And you will see that he was a vocal follower of the Messiah. And sometimes, just like we have all done in our lives, we speak before we think. How many of you have done that? You say something before you thought about it, and you wish you could take it back immediately. We've all done that. Unless you're Nancy, she's probably perfect. No, it's good to see you back here, Nancy. I'm just teasing you. Glad that God is healing Nancy. So Peter was a vocal follower of the Messiah. And he often spoke before he thought, and there was consequences to his words. Let's take a look at Matthew chapter 16, beginning in verse 13. Now, when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" And they said, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." And he said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter, here he is. He replied and said, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus answered him, "Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my called out ones. And the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven." Certainly by now, Peter had witnessed miraculous things in his walk of faith or in his journey thus far with the Messiah. But here in this passage, we see something powerful has taken place. Peter's eyes, his spiritual eyes, have truly been opened to the reality that this man who had commanded him to follow him was indeed the Son of the living God. Oftentimes, our walk of faith is like this. We feel a drawing and a hunger to know God. We recognize that there is something powerful and real about this drawing that we feel. It can happen to us in an instant, or it may happen to us over time. We have heard of this Jesus, and we know that there is something to this, but we may not completely understand. But then, all of a sudden, something changes in us, and we know that Jesus the Messiah is real. He is our Redeemer and our Savior, and He loves us. And we know this because we are not the same person that we used to be. If you have experienced this in your life, it is not a revelation that originated from your mind or your will. It is a revelation that came from God. The understanding that Jesus is the Messiah and that He is Lord does not come from flesh and blood. It comes from Yahweh Himself. Once you have been given this understanding, you know that you'll never be the same. How many can bear witness to that? You may not be perfect. You may not make the right choices every day, but you know you'll never be the same. I have a knowing inside of me, knowing that I'll never go back to the way I used to be. And I'm not perfect. There's things in my life that still need to be fixed and made better, but I'll never be that rebellious teenager that I once was. And when I say rebellious, of course I wasn't as bad as others. But I was rebellious. And I'm serious, I wasn't as bad as others were, comparatively speaking. Once you have been given this understanding, you know that you'll never be the same. And when you have that understanding, I believe it is at that moment that you have become a slave to righteousness. Amen? Something happened on the inside of you. A spiritual transaction has taken place, and your heart of stone has been removed and replaced with a heart of flesh. And you have now become a slave to righteousness. Peter was no doubt feeling strong about the Messiah, or what the Messiah had just told him regarding the revelation that he'd been given. Then very soon after that experience, there was another lesson to be learned. Even if you know that Jesus the Messiah is your Savior and Lord, there are always lessons to be learned. Amen? Nobody said amen that I heard. How many of you know there are lessons to be learned? Always. Amen? Come on now. We're not Presbyterians. Come on. You can speak. Matthew chapter 16. I don't know what Presbyterians do. I just thought that was, I could have said something else, I guess, but that just came to mind. Matthew 16, verses 21 through 23. Listen to this. This is just fresh after Peter gets his revelation that Jesus is the Christ. Jesus begins to tell them. He says, from that time, in other words, from the time that the disciples learned by the Spirit of God who Jesus was, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and the chief priests and the scribes and be killed. And on the third day, be raised. And Peter, just off the fresh revelation that Jesus is the Christ, the promised one, Peter took the Son of the living God aside. Get this picture. He took the Son of the living God aside and began to rebuke him. Does anybody else find that kind of humorous? Doesn't that speak to our human nature sometimes? How our human nature is? He says, the Bible says, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, far be it from you, Lord, this will never happen to you. And what was Jesus' response? Okay, if you say so, I hope that you're right. No? Jesus turned to him and said, Peter, get behind me, Satan. Or he said to Peter, get behind me, Satan. You are a hindrance to me, for you are not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of man. Wow. He's feeling good about the revelation that Jesus is the Christ. He pulls the Son of the living God aside. Look, what you just said about going to the chief priests, the elders, and the scribes, being killed and raised on the third day, no. Far be it from me. That's not going to happen to you. That's not God's perfect will for you. He had a little bit of revelation, then all of a sudden he knew it all. I think this is interesting. Come on, man. That's not how it's supposed to go down. This isn't the path you're supposed to walk. And Jesus responds to Peter's words and says, get behind me, Satan. You are a hindrance to me, for you are not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of men. What a shocking thing that must have been for Peter to hear. A rebuke from his Messiah and teacher. How many of you have experienced something similar? You got a revelation that Jesus Christ is Lord of your life. You are happy that God has called you into a relationship with him. And then something happens to you or to someone you love, and you think that life was not supposed to go this way. Then you are hit with the reality that God has plans that you do not completely understand. And the only thing that you can do is trust that he knows what he's doing. The plans of God are not always in line with our plans. It's not an easy thing to learn this truth, but it is a truth that must be learned. Amen? Now, as I said, because of time, I can't highlight every story in the Bible involving Peter, so let's jump to Matthew chapter 26, verse 30 through 35. And when they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. And then Jesus said to them, you will all fall away because of me this night. Here he goes again. This Messiah is saying something else that they don't want to hear. You will all fall away because of me this night, for it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. But after I am raised up, I will go before you to Galilee. Here we go again. Peter answered him, though they all fall away because of you, I will never fall away. Here he goes again. The Messiah just said that they all were going to fall away, but Peter, no. Come on, man. They might, the other 11 or 12, however many was in their circle at that time, at least 11 of them, they might fall away, but I won't. Jesus said to him, truly I tell you, this very night, before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. Peter said, even if I must die with you, I will not deny you. His heart was in the right place. His heart was after the Messiah, for the Messiah. Peter was growing. There was evidence of spiritual growth by this point in his life. He had revelation that Jesus Christ was indeed the Son of God. But he still wasn't listening to the plan of God. So once again, he speaks up and says that Jesus must be wrong. Though they all fall away because of you, I will never fall away. And Jesus tells him this very night, Peter, you will deny me 3 times. There's something powerful in this story that Matthew does not record, but Luke does. I want to share that with you. Luke says that before Jesus tells the disciples that they would deny him, Jesus tells Peter the following. And so this is Luke's account of what happened. And this is what Luke writes in Luke 22, verses 31 and 32. Jesus specifically looks at Simon, and he says, Simon, Simon, behold, Satan has demanded to have you. In your translation, perhaps the King James, it says, Satan has desired to sift you as wheat. Satan has demanded to have you that he might sift you like wheat. But listen to these words. Jesus knew. It was laid out from the beginning. This was the plan of God all along. It didn't take God by surprise. It didn't take the Messiah by surprise. Jesus said, but I have prayed for you that your faith may not fail. And listen to this. It's not that Jesus said, I have prayed for you that your faith faileth not. But then he says, and when you have repented or when you have turned again, strengthen your brothers. And then Peter said, Lord, I won't deny you. And Jesus said, before this night, you'll deny me 3 times. What can we learn from this passage? First, we learn that if we have been called to a saving faith by God, nothing can separate us from him. Did we not cover that in Romans? In life, we are faced with times and seasons when we feel like giving up. We get tired of the fight. We get hurt by others. We go through situations and circumstances that we were not planning to happen. We go through times when we are drawn away because of our carnal nature, and we follow after things that do not benefit us. In other words, we make bad choices. We make wrong choices that make us stumble from time to time. But I want you to know something. No matter what troubles or trials you face, if you have come to a genuine faith in Christ the Messiah, you will not be lost, because Jesus is interceding on your behalf. Amen? Jesus said in John chapter 6, verses 37 through 39, he says, all that the Father gives me will come to me. In other words, Jesus is affirming the fact that there are a people whom God foreknew before the foundation of the earth, and Jesus is confirming the truth that all of those who God has called, all that God has given to him, will come to him. And whoever comes to me, I will never cast out. For I have come down from heaven not to do my own will, but the will of him who sent me. And this is the will of him who sent me, that I should lose nothing of all that he has given me, but raise it up on the last day. Peter was in a situation where this promise was his saving grace. Jesus was not going to lose Peter. Even though Peter denied him 3 times, Jesus prayed for him. He told him ahead of time, the devil, Satan, has desired to sift you as wheat, but I have prayed for you. And when you have repented, when you have turned around, when you have come to your senses, when you realize what's going on, Peter, strengthen your brothers. You know the rest of the story. Jesus was taken by the soldiers in the garden. Peter cuts off the ear of the one soldier, but Jesus restores it. They take Jesus to question him and sentence him, and all the while, Peter is watching from a distance. Then as Peter sat near the courtyard, he was approached on 3 different occasions, and on each one, he denied his Savior and Messiah. The Bible says he remembered what Jesus told him, and he wept bitterly. That is the mark of someone who has been called by God. When you weep over your sinfulness, when you weep over your rebellion, when you hate the fact that you sin and make mistakes, that is the mark of someone who is in the process of being redeemed and saved. Amen? If you didn't weep over your weakness and your sinfulness, if it didn't grieve you, you have a problem. You have a big problem. The Bible says he remembered what Jesus said and wept bitterly. After the death and resurrection of Jesus, it seems that Peter tried to return to his old life of fishing. Jesus appeared to Peter and some of the disciples while they were fishing. Back, remember, just a few verses ago, Jesus said, I'm going down, I'm going to die, but I'm going to be raised up, and I'm going to see you again at Galilee. Well, this is it. When they finished breakfast, Peter had already gone fishing. He wasn't catching anything. but he was fishing. Jesus comes up and says, hey, throw your net on the other side. And he pulled up a great catch, 153 fish. And someone said, hey, Peter, this is the one whom you love. He's here in front of us. So we pick it up in John chapter 21, verse 15. And it says, when they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Do you love me more than this old life that you thought you could return to? These fish, this net. Do you love me more than these? He said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. He said to him, feed my lambs. He said it to him 3 times. He said to him on the 3rd time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was grieved because he said to him the 3rd time. I think he was just giving Peter a chance. He denied him 3 times. He's going to give Peter a chance to affirm 3 times that he indeed loved the Messiah. He said, do you love me? He said, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. And Jesus said to him, feed my sheep. In other words, get back to your calling. Get back to why you were created. Get back to the thing that I called you to do when I commanded you to follow me. Jesus came at the right time and helped Peter remember the purpose of his calling. He restored his heart just at the right time. Shortly after this time, and after the Messiah had ascended to heaven, the day of Pentecost had come. The promise of the Spirit that the prophets had foretold and that Jesus, the Messiah himself, told his disciples about had come. And it was Peter who stood up and proclaimed among the people what these events were all about. He was the one who was explaining that this was the words of the prophet Joel. He was the one who was explaining all the events leading up to this time, and he was preaching the gospel of God to those who were here, who would hear. In Acts chapter 3, after Pentecost, we read the following story of Peter and John. In Acts chapter 3, beginning in verse 1, it says, now Peter and John were going up to the temple at the hour of prayer, the 9th hour. A man lame from his birth was being carried, whom they laid daily at the gate of the temple that is called the Beautiful Gate, to ask alms of those entering the temple. Seeing Peter and John about to go into the temple, he asked to receive alms. And Peter, it was Peter again, directed his gaze at him as did John and said, look at us. And he fixed his attention on them, expecting to receive something from them. But Peter said, I have no silver and gold, but what I do have, I give to you. In the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, rise up and walk. Wow. What a change we see in Peter over time. A powerful change. Can you see the progression of spiritual growth in the life of Peter that we just briefly highlighted? Peter wasn't always perfect in the process of growing in faith. He made bad choices. He said some things out of ignorance, yet through it all, God, who had called him from the foundation of the world, was directing his steps all along the way. He did not give up on Simon Peter, and he will not give up on you. The work that he began in each and every one of us, he will complete. The work of grace is not left to chance. It can't be derailed by the enemy of our souls because God is the author and the finisher of our faith. Kim, if you'll come to the keyboard. Tracy and Caleb, come on up. The work of grace is not left to chance. So what finally became of Simon Peter? Well, we know that he was martyred for his faith. As a matter of fact, Jesus tells Peter the manner in which he will die. In John chapter 21, verse 18, Jesus says, "Truly, truly, I say to you, when you were young, you used to dress yourself and walk wherever you wanted. But when you are old," listen to this, you will stretch out your hands, and another will dress you and carry you where you do not want to go. Jesus was foretelling. He was telling Peter that you're going to be crucified one day for me. You can go ahead and start playing softly. History and tradition records that the Apostle Peter was crucified upside down on a Roman cross. He supposedly died at the hand of the Roman Emperor Nero. Brad, would you pull that house down some? At least the keyboard, anyway, maybe not the house. He supposedly died at the hand of the Roman Emperor Nero by crucifixion, and feeling unworthy to be crucified in the same manner as Jesus Christ, Simon Peter requested to be hung upside down as he was being crucified. What am I trying to say in all of this? What I've been trying to say in this story and in the story of Lazarus from the things that we are learning in the book of Romans, what I'm trying to tell you is that we serve a sovereign God who has laid out how life will be for all of creation for all time. The end was from the beginning, the Bible tells us. What I'm trying to tell you is that if you've come to a genuine faith in Christ the Messiah, he foreknew you before the foundation of the world. He had your life planned out. He knew every step you would walk. Even the times that you didn't make the right choice, even the times that you seemed shipwrecked or sidetracked, it did not take God by surprise. And it will not take God by surprise. What I'm trying to tell you is that when God is done with you, your life will have been lived in such a way to bring him glory. Amen? He is in control. The steps of a righteous man are ordered by the Lord. Paul writes in Romans 11, verse 36, he says, verse 36, he says, "For from him and through him and to him are all things. To him be glory forever." You need to know that a sovereign God chose you to be a part of a people who belong to him. If you have experienced genuine faith, amen? God chose you. Let's pray together. Father, I'm so thankful that you have called us to life. Help us to see you for who you really are. Help us to know the God of the Bible. Help us to understand that we've been called, and you will justify us, and you will glorify us, and you will finish the work that you began in us. Help us to know this about you so that we may worship you for who you are. There's an old chorus that I wanted to a song that we used to sing that's just been on my mind for a couple months.